Well, hi everybody. Welcome to the Stratosphere Lounge. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, the big brand new microphone. Hopefully it's louder than it was before. Hope everybody's doing well. Good to be here. Sorry about last week. I was actually in the hospital briefly. And the question is, am I wearing pants? There's been a big discussion about whether pants are worn or not here in the Stratosphere Lounge. And it is, if you're wearing pants, then no service. Pants, yes, but no shoes, no shirt. That's old and busted. Anyway, yeah, I was actually in the hospital briefly. This was last Thursday. That's why I not only missed the show, I didn't get a chance to put a post up. I was real tired when I shot when I shot the right angle at Tuesday. Real tired, and then tired the next Wednesday morning too. So I did a couple of thumbnails after I was done, went home, and on the way home, I started to get this really sharp pain in my chest on my right side. Now, as everybody knows, if you have a pain on your left side, you're about to die. If you have a pain on your right side, you're going to be fine. So that's the most important thing. If you get shot anywhere on the right side, you're going to live. That's what I learned from the movies. But it just started to hurt like the devil. And I don't know, it happened in the course of the time, like from the studio to home. And I also developed this kind of cough, the same cough that Scott's had, and the same cough you're going to hear a few times tonight. It's this just itchy, scratchy little cough, but there's no, it is an unproductive cough, as they say in the medical business. Aesop says it was a stitch. No, it was worse than a stitch. It hurt like the living devil. And the problem was with the cough, excuse me, like that was excruciating. And so I thought I'd just sleep it off, but we basically decided to call my GP, MD, GP, and he said I should probably go down and get an x-ray done, so I did. I still don't know what it was. I think I must have pulled a muscle somehow on the drive home, but for 2 or 3 days, it was really exactly like a cracked rib. I mean, it hurt like the devil. And every time I would cough, it was just really, really nasty. I felt a little better the next day later, and then the day after that, I felt twice as good. And the day after that, I felt twice as good, and now I don't feel anything at all. Cough is still here, but it's not what it used to be. Scott's got it too. By the way, while I was in the hospital, briefly, I noticed 2 things. First of all, the emergency room was absolutely deserted. I was the only person there, and I got a semi-private room, which was lovely. I was in there for like an hour and a half, I guess, and during the time I was there, the door was open, and I saw one entire person as a patient in the hospital for the hour and a half I was there. There was literally nobody there. It was completely empty. I found that interesting. And the second thing is, I did get a COVID-19 test, obviously, because, non-productive cough and all the rest of it. And this lovely woman came in, lovely nurse, and said, "We're going to do the COVID swab test for you." I said, "Okay." I said, "I've heard that's interesting." She said, "Yeah, you might feel a little discomfort." And I said, "All right, let's get this over with." And so she said, "Now, if it really starts to feel bad, I'll just stop for a minute." I said, "Sure." So she took a plastic swab. It looked like a cotton swab. It was a plastic swab, and she inserted it into my right nostril up into the point where I thought I was just gonna it was nasty. Then I just said, "Ah, God!" So she stopped for a second, and I thought, okay, that wasn't that bad. And then higher, and then, good God! I mean, I wasn't crying or anything, but I was thinking it over. And then she stopped again, and then one more time. And I think the way they tell is that they insert the swab until they can see the tip of it coming out of your tear duct. And once they can start to see it poking out of your tear duct, they probably figure that they've gone far enough with it. So then she's just swabbed around a little bit, pulled it out, and it's been a little sore, but other than that. So look, folks, it's not the end of the world. It is an unpleasant test. And it lasts all of 7 or 8 seconds. You can take anything for 10 seconds. But it was like, whoa. So anyway, it was an experience which came back negative. I was somewhat disappointed, I have to tell you. I really was. I was like thinking, okay, well, let's get this immunity thing over with. But in any event, it was negative. X-rays were negative, and I just somehow must have pulled a muscle on the way home. In retrospect, I was trying to think it over, and because it happened between the office and my house, which is a 10-minute drive on a busy day. It did not include an antibody test, by the way. Thank you for asking. I asked specifically about that. They said, nope, just measures whether you're shedding viruses now or not. I would love to have had an antibody test, and I'm hoping to get one. But in any event, I was trying to think, well, what caused this pain in my side? Because it didn't develop overnight, and it really, really felt like a cracked rib. And if you've ever had a cracked rib, you know that it hurts when you breathe, but if you have to breathe deeply, it hurts like the living hell. And every time you cough like that, it hurt. And I thought it over, and I thought, what could it have been? And every now and then, when I'm in a relatively good mood, Dave Wellman says it's the most excruciating pain ever. I've had a cracked rib, and I've also had a kidney stone, and there's no comparison between the two. The kidney stone wins by 100 miles. That is by far more painful than a cracked rib if you haven't had one. And it's not a stone, by the way. It's like those god-awful sand burrs that we had in Florida. Those nasty. They look like they're designed by Satan to rip up as much of you as they possibly can. Anyway, I was trying to think, what the hell could have happened? I was fine, and then I had this enormous tight pain in my chest, and I was thinking maybe I was absent-mindedly listening to music, and if music's really exciting or energetic, I get a little pumped up. And I know that I'm not 100% sure this is it, but I suspect it was because I was playing a song that's not an actually very good song, but there is a moment in that song that to me is it generates like what's the word I'm looking for? It's not unconscious. It's like an automatic response. I cannot control it. And brace yourselves. Dave Big Booty says he's been on fire. That stings a bit. Well, I tip my hat to you, sir. You have definitely won the contest for this evening. Only time. That's it, Dave Big Booty. That's it. It's only time. Just I get so excited. Only time is used as an anesthetic in parts of Santa Monica. Reflexive, exactly. So I'm about to be clown myself, but nevertheless, that's what the show's about. So the song is actually "Man in Motion" by is it John Parr, and it's the theme for St. Elmo's Fire, and it's not a particularly good song. But they do something in that song, and I've never heard anything like it before. And it's that part where he says, "You broke the boy in me, but you won't break the man." Pow! And it's like, I don't know what it is about that, but it's that pow. And I always do that, just what I did just now. It's automatic. Pow! And I might have hit the steering wheel hard. That's all I can think of. But it is, I don't know what it is about that particular quick little musical phrase. But ever since the first time I've heard it, I've never been able to sit still with it. It just controls me, and not just like kind of a da da da. It's always like, "Oh, yeah, me, but we'll break the man." Pow, and it's like, wow. So maybe I pulled a muscle doing that, but in any event, I'm fine now. So that's the adventure story of the week, and you'll be able to tell your grandchildren that you heard about it. Like this. Yeah, Phil Collins. Who is this? Pat drives a black goat. That's a new name, unless it's an old person under a new name. But yeah, it is Pavlovian. Says Vickery. Anyway, it was maybe it was that, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But in any event, I'm feeling much better. But the fact is, I came home and it was already just past showtime, and I was really feeling just bad. So anyway, sorry I missed you, and I'm especially sorry I didn't put up a post saying I wasn't going to be there. I do have some cool things to show you, things that I tried to show you a couple weeks ago, and I thought, no problem, big deal, I'll just drop them in. They didn't drop it. But this time I actually had some time. So we'll do a little science fiction update real quick, and then we'll get to the questions. I've got most of these you've seen before. 4 of them I'm pretty sure you haven't, but I don't know if you've ever seen any of them really done the way they're supposed to be done. So I'm going to do them all again from scratch because it's interesting to see just briefly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, he says, meaning 40 minutes. But it is an interesting thing to watch one after another to watch the progression in terms of my technical skill with Unreal Engine. I had a lot of experience with 3D Studio, and as I've said before many times, I'm used to 3D Studio, any one of the frames that you're about to see being a 7-minute frame, a 15-minute frame, some of them being half hour, 30 minutes per frame, 30 frames per second. I'm used to turning on the computer and letting it render for 3 or 4 days and then hoping things turned out okay. But once I set up the lighting on Unreal, it takes about, 10 minutes to bake the lighting. And then it does the 22-second animation, does it at about a frame a second. I mean, honestly, in 2 minutes, it's done. And then it's like, oh my God, you can make adjustments, and it's fantastic. So I actually had the time today to format these things and put them in the full frame so they're not seeing a quarter of it, and then have me just grab it and pull it. So we'll just go through it again briefly. I'll tell you where we are with this thing afterwards because things are changing and getting interesting. So let's just go ahead and proceed. The first one is one, well, like I said, I'm going to do these in order, so most of these you've seen before. But I'll talk a little bit about them, and then we'll get on with it. So here's the first one. What I was going for in this one was a sense of mood. I wanted something that felt desolate and cold and a long, long, long way from home. Now, this was the first one I did because, frankly, that landscape is something I just bought. It's available at the Unreal Store. The rover I'd had from a different program. And you don't want to look too carefully at the rover because I hand animated it. The wheels aren't turning. I just basically took a look at it every 5 or 10 frames and kind of adjusted the wheels as much as I could. But the thing I do like about this is I like the fact that the planet looks really cold and really far away. And I love the beams of light and the warm light coming out of the cabin. That to me is like life and civilization on a pretty distant planet, Space Antarctica, says Dave Big Boot. It's a pretty good call. So here's the next one. It's the same map. It's the same landscape. It's the same rover. And I still haven't got the rover rigged yet, but I did get, for the first time, a human being rigged by a guy who I've been working with in Germany and Italy, and he's a terrific guy, and so he allowed me to kind of crack this thing. So here's number 2. I really like the super widescreen format. But this was a case where I actually had a rigged model of a spaceman. So basically what I did with this one was I just took a motion capture of walking animation, and again, professionals set this up so that they just basically tell the guy walk from here to there. I had to match the footsteps to the distance covered, and then I had to go in every 5 frames and raise and lower the figure so that his feet kept in contact with the ground. But I like the shot a lot, and I like the dynamic quality of the rover coming up on the background, and even that little jump, getting a little air there is cool because it's a lower gravity planet. So that was an improvement. Certainly getting actors into the scene really helped, and I have a pretty limited motion capture library. So the next step I decided to do was I thought, okay, I like the lights on the rover, but I want more lights and I want more detail and stuff. So I started working on the rover. And I got some cool decals that are light emitting decals, and I went nuts with those. So this is a lighting test of the rover. It's the same rover you saw. I got a second astronaut figure rigged. Obviously, it's the same clone. All of those characters, all those figures are the same guy. But I like this a lot for a couple of reasons. I took each one of the 4 characters you can see is running 2 or 3 animation strips, tried to keep them all different, and I tried to give it a sense of perspective. I love the fact that the guy in the front steps out into the light and so on, and I especially like the fact that you get a sense of scale of the rover. I like the rubber on the tires, and I especially like, this is almost impossible for me to do in 3D Studio. I loved the fact that those lights are so blown out that they're like too bright to look at. If you look at the top, you'll see there's a white strobe going dink dink, and then there's, can't really see them because they're on the top, but there's 4 red squares that are going. So it's dink dink, bonk bonk, dink dink, bonk bonk, like that. And I like the flare so much that I took the side lights. You see these red lights on the side, and I cranked them up, and then I got really cool lighting effects coming off of the rover. So what you're about to see next is the exact same animation, but with the lighting changed an awful lot. So I think this is wicked cool. I just love it, and I love how the guy by the wheel in the middle there, the middle guy, he steps in and out of the white light, and he disappears in the shadows, and I think it's just really, really dramatic lighting. And now, needless to say, they're doing this on the showroom floor. You can see the floor is absolutely flat, but since it's pitch black dark, I really, really, really like the fact that you can't really look directly at those rover lights. They're just too bright for you. Unreal Engine's amazing. This is Unreal 4. Unreal 5 will be available next year. It'll be even more amazing. But again, a bunch of different motion capture files for the various actors, and it gives it a pretty good look. Okay, so now brace yourselves for the next one. For the next one, I got yet another more detailed suit, got it rigged, and I started using downloaded photo scanned actual heads. They're like $40 each, and so the realism on the face coming up and on the actions coming up is a lot better. The next scene you're going to see is the same kind of thing, different suits, different size characters, different individual faces and heads, but still me just stringing together a bunch of pre-existing mocap scenes to try and tell some exceedingly simple visual story. So I think this next one's a big leap forward. I did this last week. Now that's interesting of the cutaway there, because it takes a lot of getting used to for me as a film director and in 3D Studio. In order to get this scene cut that way, I'd have to render all of it from this angle, and then I would have to place the second camera and render what I wanted from the reversal, which is right there, and just render that and then edit it in. But the amazing thing about this game engine is you basically set up the scene as if you would be directing actors on a stage. And once you've got them on a stage, you can put as many cameras as you want to in there, and the action runs in what we'll call it real time. These models are more complex. I don't want 30 frames a second, and I don't need it. But basically, they will run on your computer monitor in more or less in real time. And then you put as many cameras in there as you want to, and you simply decide to make a cut. And I'm on camera 1 here, camera 1, camera 2's already in the scene, it's not rendered. And then I cut to camera 2, and that's still good. And a guy comes walking through the frame, excellent, great, love it. Cut back to camera 1, pa-pow, and it's all done in Engine, and it looks great. Now, you never want to point out the defects, at least in the beginning, because once you do, people begin to see them. A lot of times, they show business adage and never let them see you sweat, because a lot of times the audience doesn't know. So anyway, but one thing that's especially hurting from this, the face model is good. And you can see that all of the guys in this scene have different faces. They're different heads, different sizes, and different bodies. But the one problem with this that's most noticeable to me and my magnificently trained eye is that the eyes on this guy are dead. He's not making any facial expressions. That's a whole nother problem. But his eyes aren't moving around. It's because the head is a non-animated head. It's stuck on the bone for the head, so his head's moving back and forth, but his actual face isn't even doing anything. So that's cool. Then I tried and said, okay, you know what? Let me just strap on some lights onto these guys. I'll just strap some of those decals onto them in a big old hurry, and I'll do the same scene again with different lighting. But I could not get the reversal to work. Every time I went to the reversal, it crashed. It crashed for 3 hours. Finally, I said, all right, I'll just do it again. So here's the same exact scene, except no cutaway. It's all on that first angle. And when it finishes the cycle, I did it with night lighting. And I think this next one's pretty cool too. So here you go, exact same scene. All the lights are coming from the guy's suit. The helmets are lit and so on. All of the 4 guys have a chest light that's directing the actual lighting. I'm not controlling any of that. I've got depth of field set so that the guys in the background are slightly out of focus, and I got this guy doing his thing, and I think that just looks great. That first turn from the guy on the far left turns a bit to the side, and then the front guy, the main guy who we're following, turns towards him, lights him up a little bit. It's awesome. That reaction there is really cool. But it's still got the dead eyes. Everything is ray traced, and it took about, 15, 20 minutes to build the lighting and the ray tracing, but all of the reflections in the helmets, the lights, everything, it's perfect. It would have taken me a decade to set this shot up in would have been possible for me. It just wouldn't have been possible. Even when I was last playing around with 3D Studio in 2005 or 6 or 7. So that's fantastic. You can see the little light on his chest. That's the light. It's a light decal. They've all got one right in the center of the chest there. And that's the only lighting in the scene, is the lighting's coming off of those suits. So anyway, I got the suits. I like the suits. They're high quality suits, and they're rigged. They're ready to go. And next thing is to incorporate different suits types in different heads. One last set of things to do here to show you, and this I did just yesterday, I want to say. Before I can animate the facial expressions, that's a whole other thing. It involves morphing, and that's going to be the next stage. But in between what you're seeing now and there, I have to have the ability to animate the eyes. So the eyes have to go in as separate objects. And when you get good at this, you can create something called a facial rig. You basically just move a box around, and then all of the eyes look where they're supposed to look and so on. But the stuff I'm going to show you next is me just setting, 20 keyframes, and I would rotate the eye 19 degrees to the right and 5 degrees up, and then do that with the other eye. It took hours to match it. And you'll see that when the eyes are moving, it's not nearly as dramatic a test. You'll see that the character becomes a lot more alive when the eyes are moving. And I didn't put nearly as much effort into the smoothing out the motion capture, but check this out. It's a different head, and the movement of the eyes adds a lot. Now, these are all the eye positions are hand animated by me, and that means I'm just basically just fooling around. I'll change his view from one place to another every second or two, and then I'll have his eyes do these little motions. But basically, I'm hand animating all of those. And the great thing about motion capture is that your eyes are actually moving all the time. I mean, constantly. These little micro motions are what really gets you across the uncanny valley. His face is still made out of stone because the face isn't rigged yet. But you can see that the movement of the eyes really does give him a sense of being alive in a way that the last shot just wasn't. And then finally today, I'll give you a close-up of this, and you can see in the close-up, you can see some of the problems. I had to make the eyes the right size. I had to guess the right size. I had to set the depth and all of that. So when you see them up close, they look a little worse and they need some work. But once I get the character rigged and set, once I get this individual guy in the suit that I want, with the lights that I want, the eyes that I want, once I get that saved as a blueprint, then I simply drop them and off they go. So it's all a process of building a step. So here's the same exact animation, but with a little closer look. One of the things I learned early in we're doing the MST3K thing again here. But one of the things that I learned early in 3D Studio is when you move the eyes, you tend to want to set a keyframe, and then you'll have them look over, and then you know, and his eyes take, I don't know, 10 frames, that's a third of a second to move from one place to another. And then you realize, no, the key to eye animation is that I've got his eyes, when his eyes move from one point to another, like a wide one, like coming up here, that happens in 2 frames. The quickness of the eye move is a big part of selling the actual animation. And of course, the reason he looks still so awkward is because the face is absolutely rigid. When you throw in a lot of little, twitches, and whenever you move your eyes, you squint a little bit, and all of this stuff, that's all coming. And that concludes our demonstration for the evening. One of the things that's happened since I started working on this was a realization that I had to really overcome my burning desire to try to get the scene absolutely the way I wanted it from the beginning. In other words, to get the lighting, the motion, the facial capture, all of it. I finally realized I was wasting so much time doing that. And so I basically just decided to, learn Unreal by using it. And so that's what I did. I can't figure out how to animate a character, but I can make this vehicle move from A to B, and I'll just give it a little bounce. Okay, and then I got a rigged eye, a rigged body, so I can put some motion capture in there, and so on. So they work on that, and then I work on the lighting on the rover and stuff, and that looked good. And then I add individual faces that are photo scanned faces, and they look real good. And then, okay, I can't really do the face rig yet. I could, but I just don't want to. There's no point yet. So I put in some eyes and have the eyes move. All these guys will have moving eyes from now on. And then the next step will be to look into some options for doing basic expressions. Smiles, look up, squints, that kind of thing. After I can get the basic expressions done, then we move on to essentially the last phase, really, in terms of what stands between me and actual performances. The next phase would be, I'm sorry, just reading a comment. Dave Big Booty, I think he's talking about Nancy Pelosi. Dennis Miller says she always looks like someone at Lakehurst watching the Hindenburg coming into dock. That's just Dennis Miller in just perfection. Anyway, so all of that is there and stuff. I've given a great deal more thought to the whole universe, and every day that goes by I become more mentally kind of disconnected, not just from like the Star Citizen universe in terms of the game and the lore and everything, but from all of the let's just call it the science fiction model of it. If you look at some of the stuff that Star Trek's not a great let's take Star Wars for example. There are like combat models, and what I mean by that is there are things that our eyes are used to seeing, and so when they're presented to us in a science fiction format, we understand them. And a good example of what I'm talking about would be that scene, some scenes towards I think maybe in the Return of the Jedi. But there's these scenes where you get these gigantic space cruisers or battleships, and they're passing each other, and they may be a whole mile or two apart, and they're just whacking and wailing at each other. And maybe they have shields or maybe not. But basically, what that model is the model of the Age of Sail, and we've all seen Age of Sail movies, so you're emotionally prepared for. Okay, here's a really big ship. Here's another really big ship. Okay, they're starting to cross each other now. Now they get the broadsides. Now it's going to get nasty because both sides are blasting each other and shooting within range and all that other stuff. So that's one model. The other model that Star Wars introduced really and has never gone away that I'm aware of, except for The Expanse, I think, which I haven't seen much of, and also Babylon 5 to some degree. The second model is World War II in space model. And that's, Chris Roberts said, basically, that's his goal, is World War II in space. So the World War II in space model in things like Star Trek, Star Trek, I'll get to in a second. But in Star Wars, it's World War II in space. You've got these space fighters that behave as if they're in an atmosphere. And they bank and turn, and they go pew, 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 and they shoot laser beams that are not only visible in space, but really pretty slow when you think about it. And again, it works because the audience is prepared for this. They know what that looks like, and so it's famously well known that in the Death Star attack in the first movie in Star Wars, which I refuse to call A New Hope, Star Wars, the first movie. Somebody pointed out the monitor in the Merrimack. That's it exactly. So the big battleships, and then whichever one takes the most damage, loses. But when they brought in the World War II in space thing, Lucas famously cut the final Death Star attack scene and used a lot of inspiration from documentaries of World War II. Same thing with the Falcon, when the Falcon's making the escape from the TIE fighters, the don't get cocky kid thing. That whole thing about, okay, here come the space planes, and here's a guy with a machine gun. Got him, okay, and it's look, it's fun, it's great, and all of that, and Star Citizen had that, and one of the things that's most annoying about Star Citizen was the actual effective range of the weapons was usually inside a kilometer, and the detection range went all the way out to 10 or 12 kilometers, and shields and stuff. So I thought, okay, and this can become so deeply embedded in your mind in terms of science fiction that it's almost impossible to get yourself clean out of it. But I had done that many, many years ago, and as I got further and further away from playing the game and stuff, I just began to realize, okay, let's just get back to brass tacks and stuff. So I decided, okay, so, shields, what's the point of shields? I realized, thinking about it, I'm talking about dramatically now, because all of this stuff is all fiction. I mentioned to someone in a letter a couple days ago that my vision of what space combat will actually look like as of today is probably about as accurate as Buster Crabs was in Flash Gordon. But nevertheless, you play the hands you got. So I started thinking about this, and why do we have shields in science fiction? And the shield, Dave Wellman says it's plot armor. That's essentially correct. The reason that we have shield technology in science fiction, in visual science fiction, is because shields allow us to continue the combat for a longer period of time than would otherwise make sense. In other words, if you keep shooting at each other, shields allow you to keep shooting at each other, and you stretch out the action sequence because it takes a while to knock your shields down or whatever the case may be. And so they're an effective way to extend the combat. And how many times have you seen it? Look, the first people to do this that I'm aware of was the original Star Trek series, where they wanted the ability for the Enterprise to get hit but not destroyed, and that's critical. They wanted, and so how do you do that? Well, I know, we got shields. And so then you're back in the situation I described 2 weeks ago. How fast does the Enterprise travel? It travels precisely as quickly as the plot needs it to be traveling. And that's the same thing. How strong are the shields on the Enterprise? The shields on the Enterprise are strong enough to take the Enterprise to a state of almost destruction without actually being destroyed while the crew's on board. That's what shields are for. That's what they do. And you can play with that game forever. You can take 5 hits, and you can say shields are down to 8% or shields are down to 80%. It's the writer's, it's a dial. Shield strength and shields in general are a dial that the writer can use to determine how long he wants the combat and the pew-pews and the explosions and the to last. There's no evidence for for shields, really, in terms of the real world. There's no groundwork for them. So I'm getting rid of shields. I'm extending the combat effective range between these two ships to something on the order of at least hundreds and hundreds of kilometers, probably thousands and maybe tens of thousands of kilometers. Certainly, they will not be visible to each other. I think at point blank range in the stuff that I had been working on for so many years in the past that I'm coming back to now, point blank range means you could actually say, my God, I can see the little speck moving against the stars. That's how close we are. So we then say, okay, so what are the weapon sets? Well, there's advantages and disadvantages. Energy weapons have the advantage of being at a reasonable range, and by that I mean hundreds of kilometers or thousands. They're essentially instantaneous. That's good because there's no avoiding that. If you can put the thing on the target, you're gonna hit the target. The problem with energy weapons is, number one, you've got to, and you have a benefit in space too, because there's no dispersion of energy by the atmosphere. So they're packing more of a punch than they would here in the thick soup of the surface of planet Earth. However, the inverse square law is inviolate. If you double the distance, you quarter the power. And that's a bit of a problem. And energy weapons can be defended against. You can't stop the weapon, but the damage can be mitigated, and it can be mitigated actively and passively. The passive way to do it is to have armor on the ship. It just either reflective armor, but that's off the table only because it just makes the visuals. If every ship was a mirror, it would just be interesting for a few moments, and that's the end of it. But you can have ablative armor, which would be heavy, and heavy means you have to accelerate it, and it means money and cost, and it means if you're a cargo ship, if you're carrying all this armor, that's cargo you can't carry. We're not going to have anything like the piracy involved in things like Star Citizen or Star Wars type things, because the ships never get that close and the weapons are too deadly. So you can mitigate it passively, an energy weapon, by having like a blade of armor. Now we start to get to the cool stuff. Or you could actively degrade the impact of an energy weapon like a laser. If you were to do something that I first saw in Traveler, 1979, they called them sandcasters. They were little like a depth charge canister, and they'd shoot it in the direction of the target vessel, and it would explode and put this cloud of sand out there. And then the laser has to punch through that sand, and that eats up a fair amount of the thing's energy. And I thought, well, shoot, if you're going to use sand, why not use glitter? I mean, a glitter bomb would be awesome. So that's basically a great point defense. You're cruising along, the enemy's out there, you know exactly where they are, you can't see them yet, but you know that's where the laser beam's going to come from, unless it's the first shot, which is where a laser weapon might be useful. And so, as a point defense, you basically put a canister of glitter out there and just have it disperse into a little cloud. You don't want it too wide. And then the laser beam has to go through that glitter to hit the target. Now we start to get to the stuff that I really is the reason I wanted to talk about all of this, because it's not so much about science fiction as it is just about good writing. I just watched a lot of scenes from Crimson Tide, which is one of the best movies ever made. And I've talked about Crimson Tide many, many times because it is so well written and so much the opposite of lazy. Give me a second here. I'm going to pull up an email or something, because I actually wrote the lines down. But Crimson Tide to me is the ultimate example of great movie writing, because, well, for the reasons I'm about to outline. I've been down this road before, but it's important for those people who are interested in the entertainment side of things. It's kind of what we do on this show a lot. But let me just find that paragraph that I quoted here. Give me a second. Okay, so where is it? here it is. So this is a paragraph I wrote in an email. So there's a scene in Crimson Tide in the beginning, real early in the movie, where they're doing a missile launch drill. And Hackman is the captain, and they're getting ready to run this drill. And he gets on the microphone, grabs the mic, and he says, "Set condition 1 SQ for WSRT. This is the captain. This is an exercise." And then immediately you cut to Denzel Washington, and Washington says, "Set condition 1 SQ for WSRT. This is the exec. This is the exec. This is an exercise." And I was thinking about that as a writer now, not as a guy who likes submarines and military technology and stuff. And I said, okay, that expression is gobbledygook for people who don't know anything about subs. It doesn't. There's no way the audience can understand what set condition 1 SQ for WSRT means. And the thing I realized when I looked at the scenes again was that the audience doesn't need to know that. In fact, it actually kind of helps that they don't know what that means, because I just read you 2 lines from Crimson Tide, and in 2 lines, Gene Hackman's saying, "Set condition 1 SQ for WSRT. This is the captain. This is an exercise." And then Denzel Washington repeating the order. Here's the 2 things that you learned from this. Doesn't matter what set condition 1 SQ or the WSRT is. It doesn't matter. That's not why they did it. This is why it's such a brilliantly written script. It's brilliantly written script because of the 2 things you do learn from those 2 sentences. The first thing you learn is that nuclear missiles are not launched in a kind of a lighthearted manner. It's not like, it's not like the captain says, "All right, boys, let's let them have it. Give them tubes 1 and 2. No, it's an extremely rigid, extremely well-defined protocol. And just by those 2 lines, you know that you cannot just walk up and push a button and have a nuclear missile come out of an Ohio class SSBM. It tells you that can't happen. And the second thing that these 2 lines tell you is that it requires consent. If you don't have those 2 lines, then the entire mutiny that happens doesn't make any sense. There's no reason why the chief would support Denzel Washington's character. There's no reason why the crew would accept the fact that the executive officer has relieved the captain of the ship if it wasn't for the fact that it requires consent from both of them, and that consent is set up early in the movie by those 2 lines. The captain says something, and then the exec says something. So we already know that in order to get this, we need 2 of them. That's why they run the missile drill. Later in the movie, the captain basically, at the point of the mutiny, when the captain says, "You will, I'm giving the order, and I expect you to repeat it." And Denzel Washington has a really great little speech. It's just a couple lines. It's fantastic. And he's basically saying, "Captain, this is entirely why we have these procedures. Give it, goddamn it, Mr. Hunter. I expect you to follow me. Give the goddamn order." And he says, "No, sir. Launch of nuclear missiles requires the consent of the captain and the executive officer. I'm the executive officer, and I do not give my consent. And furthermore," and so when they finally relieve the captain, they relieve the captain because the captain has broken the protocol, and that is why you have a movie, and that's why the movie works, because the movie's about a mutiny, and some of the guys on the ship go with the captain. These are guys that don't understand their job. They're behaving like mammals. He's their leader. He's the alpha guy. Hackman's the alpha guy. I'm loyal to him. The chief is the guy who's really the kind of the center of the movie in a way, because the chief is the guy who is loyal to the captain. He's known the captain forever. He doesn't particularly like Denzel Washington's character. Certainly doesn't know him very long. But when it comes time to see whether or not Denzel's going to be arrested, like the captain tells him to, the chief says, "Sir, the exec's right. Let's just put this down. The executive officer's right," and he goes with his duty. It's why it's just a great movie. And And there's a moment in there where basically Hackman is just prior to this, Hackman's getting ready to do the actual launch. He's got the emergency action message, which is properly formatted. I concur. And see you, buddy. And there's a scene where Denzel is expressing some concerns about a missile drill. He's concerned that fire may flare up. Now's not the time. And Washington, and Hackman looks at Washington with just this disgust and this hatred. Like, how dare you, question my orders? How dare you? But in the scene where they're getting ready to launch for real, the mutiny becomes possible because Denzel is arguing with him and he's trying to make the case, and Hackman finally turns to him and he says, "Now shut the F up. This is my ship. I'm the captain of this ship. Now shut the fuck up." And that outburst, watch everybody in the CIC, everybody is like, they're just stunned. They're not stunned that the fact that they're disagreeing. They're stunned that the captain has lost control. He's lost his emotional control. And everybody on board realizes it, and that's why the mutiny becomes possible, and then the counter mutiny and all the rest of it. It's just great writing. And it's great writing because it's not lazy writing. Somebody mentioned, boy, they must have had a great technical advisor on that show. Turns out they did. They had the former captain of the USS Alabama was a technical advisor on that show. So I go all to this trouble just to tell you that I'd mentioned before how it doesn't matter that the audience knows what they're saying or not. It has the ring of truth. But I hadn't realized basically that in those two sentences of technical jargon, we already know what we have to know for the rest of the story to make sense. This is not something that's done lightly. It's an extremely rigid procedure. And number two, it requires the consent of the executive officer. And everything after that makes sense. It's fantastic. It's a fantastic movie, beautifully written movie. By the way, just for giggles, I watched a little bit of Hunter Killer, which came out a year or two ago with Gerard Butler. And in the space of, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, not even, you're just like, oh my God, this is just pathetic. So anyway, back to sci-fi, and we will take some questions, honestly. So you got the broadside model. You got the World War II in space model. And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is we're seeing people trying to have it both ways. And that's a shame. And it's a shame because even really good people like the guys behind Axon are terribly guilty of this. In Discovery and it started in Next Generation. Once you got computer graphics, you weren't worried about the placement of physical models on poles and compositing and all the rest of it. Excuse me. Once you got computer graphics, you do whatever you want to. And once we got into computer graphics, that's when we started to see dogfights between battleships. And that is the worst of both worlds. And you see it all the time now. You see, here's a Klingon ship, and then the Enterprise is rolling, and then it rolls after it, and really, the original Star Trek show had the most accurate space combat. In other words, we don't even see the enemy unless we're on like full magnification. We're not dodging. We're not. Our engagement range is not, we're not 30 feet away. They had the most realistic version of space combat because they had the worst special effects options. They just didn't have the time, the money, or the means really to put the Romulan ship and the Enterprise in the same shot, and so they didn't. And so it's a long way away, and you're seeing it on the screen, but that's at full magnification. And just through the technological limitations of the show, they actually got it as right as it's gotten. Ever since then, engagement ranges have closed and closed and closed because people think that's visually interesting. And now you have battleships dogfighting with each other and going pew 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 pew. Oh, shields hit. Our shields are down. Deflectors are down. Whatever. As I was thinking more and more about this, I realized I came to a conclusion that obviously the entire real world has come to, and ramming, yeah, good point, John. Um, and I've come to a conclusion that obviously I've talked about before and that I understood militarily, but I kind of emotionally got to a conclusion. I'm going to be doing part of a story where a guy is going to keep that kind of, out of the box creative thinker kind of thing. I'm going to throw in some John Paul Jones and stuff. But he basically says the powers that be in the space America say, listen, we have limited resources, but we're quick on our feet. We're SpaceX and the guys that are making the ships for the model, the model would be for the Royal Navy for the existing space battleships or whatever, those space vehicles. I said they're fossilized in their thinking. They haven't changed the design in 100 years. And so they say to this guy who they've read his papers on combat and so on, and so there's a lot of John Boyd in there too. And they basically say to him, if we were to design a new frigate, I just love frigates. I love the name and I love the size of the ship. I love everything about frigates. They said if we had the means to build a couple of these things and we gave it to you to do, the guy says, I'm not a naval architect. I said, yeah, but what would be on the ship? And I've got to these scenes write themselves for me. So if we were to give you the resources to design a fighting ship, what would you do? And he says, well, the first thing I would do is I'd get rid of all these useless secondary batteries and multiple primary batteries. I want one big weapon that can kill a ship in one shot from a long way away. That's what I want. And that's it. It's like secondary batteries. In other words, every time you see science fiction where ships are exchanging blows, I'm just loving the history of this. So sorry if this is boring for you. We'll get to questions later, but I'm just on a roll and I'm enjoying this enormously. The Galleon version, and this is even in Star Citizen when they have the Idris fights. It's like fighters attacking. The reason that we buy that is because we're being tricked. We know what pirate movies look like, and we know that ships exchanging huge amounts, high volume of fire. Well, the reason that they changed volumes of fire was twofold. First, the accuracy of the weapons weren't very good, and second, the destructive power of the weapons weren't very good. You could throw in an iron ball through a wooden ship, and you do that enough times and you'll send the ship to the bottom, but one iron ball into the side of a wooden ship is not going to sink that ship. But that's all they had. That was the best weapon they had. So they went to volume of fire because the weapon itself was not a killing weapon, and it wasn't particularly accurate. And the same thing, exact same analogy for musketry and mass firing and so on. Once you get into World War II, now you see fewer and fewer weapons because the weapons are deadlier, the targeting is deadlier, but the armor's better too. So even though there weren't a whole lot of big battleship shootouts, what you found in, it's on the tip of my tongue. It drives me crazy when this happens. Jutland. And then in the Bismarck versus the Hood and so on, you find that now they're firing fewer weapons. They're firing them over a much longer distance, but one weapon is still not a killing shot unless it gets a critical hit. The armor protection on battleships in World War I and World War II was reasonably effective, and you still had to put a number of weapons on there. And so when you finally come to the present now, with like a modern torpedo, World War II torpedo would explode against the side of the hull of the ship. It'd blow a hole in the ship. And depending on how big the ship was and how much of a military ship it was in terms of watertight compartments, double hulls, all of that, you could blow the hole in the side of a ship, and in a merchant ship probably would sink it, and a destroyer would probably sink it too. But anything bigger than that, you could contain the damage that one torpedo could do. It took a spread of torpedoes to sink a ship, and to sink the Yamato, I want to say it took 13 torpedoes and something like 12 or 15 direct bomb hits, but it took a lot of damage. And that's because the technology in World War II was the technology to put a torpedo against the side of a ship, touches it, kaboom. Now, a single torpedo can kill, probably couldn't kill a Nimitz-class ship, but kill anything smaller than that, because the torpedo now is smart enough to not run into the side of the ship and blow a hole in the ship. The torpedo swims directly underneath the ship. It explodes without contacting the ship at all. And what happens is it puts a gigantic air bubble there, and nobody really realizes this, but you cannot, that no spine of a ship is designed to take that. Keel of a ship is designed to keep a ship together as long as all of it's being supported by water. And when you take the water away from the bottom of that ship, the keel just collapses. The ship breaks in half. Modern torpedo explodes underneath the center of a ship, and it will break the ship in half. And that's it. It's done. So a modern torpedo, you can't really put enough air underneath the Nimitz, something the size of the Nimitz, and do it in one. And these ship-killing missiles are good for superstructure, but they would bounce off the side of the Iowa. So I'm back to where we really are down to where we are today. And so to me, the future, the space combat future, is the closest analogy we have is submarine combat, which has been described as hide and seek with bazookas, where basically, given those kind of pressures, one torpedo hit is probably going to do you. Two certainly will. And so if you're dealing with a weapon that is essentially one shot, one kill weapon, then it no longer becomes about the weapon. You've got the technology to deliver a killing shot with one solid hit, either of a missile or conceivably a laser, but a slug thrower or some part, a railgun, put slug through something with enough energy to kill it with one hit. So if you can kill with one hit, which is pretty much the case in subs, then you are in the world where it's no longer about the weapons, and it's no longer about shields, it's no longer about damage control, it's not about any of that. It's all about sensors and detection. That's what it's about. If you have the ability to kill a target at long range, and they have the ability to, with one shot, then there's none of this trading shots kind of thing. It's sub-combat. It's like whoever gets the first shot in is going to win. Oh, hey, how are you, man? And so then it becomes about detection. And this is the point I've been trying to make basically for the last 45 minutes. The Crimson Tide example that I went through shows that you can write realistic stuff, and it's hard work, and the writers have to do a lot of research, but it can be done, and it can be done and work much more effectively than the damn things like, Hunter Killer, which gives you what you expect, There's a scene in Hunter Killer where they dive the sub towards the bottom of the ocean, and the torpedoes are following, and at the last second he pulls up, and the torpedoes go into a shipwreck, and like, come on, man, come on. So if you're going to try and keep things real, and you still want to have combat to take place long enough so that it's still some action, you can keep an audience with suspense, and the detection part is the suspense. That's actually very suspenseful. We know about where they are, and every second that goes by, we're improving our targeting solution, and we're decreasing the probability bubble where this enemy ship is. But we don't know whether he's detected us yet or not, and whether he's got a weapon on the way or not. That can be written in a very suspenseful way, and that suspense will hold an audience, but you ultimately have to have some action. Action means, if you think it over, action means that the people on your ship, the people you're following, the Enterprise, let's say, for the action to work dramatically, it has to be possible for the ship to be damaged so severely that it nearly kills it, but not so severely that it kills your entire group of heroes, and that's the end of your story right there. It's over. You lost. Likewise, when you're shooting at an enemy, if you get him with one kill, sometimes that's okay, but if you built up the enemy emotionally, then you want to have more than one hit on the guy. You want to string it out. So now we get into the stuff that actually, this is where the whole story circles around and comes in the back door and works like a charm. And here's what I mean by that. So I talked about the glitter clouds and ablative hulls and stuff. And you can't see an energy beam in space, a laser beam in space. But I have seen lasers on the side of incoming missile rounds and on the side of even incoming mortar shells. And they do this, you know. It's not like it touches it, it just goes boom. They have to like paint it. It takes a second or maybe less, but nevertheless, there's a moment when that beam is on the target, heating it up, and then eventually enough energy gets in there and it basically blows up. So even though the weapon is not visible in space, I not only think it's more accurate, I personally think it's more interesting and more dramatic and cooler than instead of seeing this red beam come and produce like a gasoline explosion. I think it's much more interesting to have this ship that you've identified as your ship all of a sudden have this blinding spot that's just doing this, trying to punch a hole in it. And the ablative armor is vaporizing. It's getting white hot and vaporizing and coming off the hull. It's taking the energy, and it's like the reentry heat shields on the bottom of a Gemini or Mercury or Apollo capsule. It's sucking up the energy, and it is designed to heat up and take the heat with it. It's ablative armor. Seeing a ship get hit by a laser with ablative armor, the armor can defeat the weapon or at least degrade the weapon. You don't have to go through this whole bullshit about, it's a salty night for me by my standards, about seeing the beam. Dramatically, you want to see the beam. You want to see the weapon impact the target. Again, this is a balance between realism and dramatic necessity. But it can be done. So even though you can't see the beam coming, and even though the beam is essentially instantaneous, what you do see is you can see the weapon playing across the hull, and you can see the armor ablating, and you get a cloud of gas, and you get this armor, the ablative stuff becomes white hot, and it just burns off. And you don't see the beam coming in, but once you start hitting the target, then you do see the beam, because now you can see the beam coming through the gas and the particles coming off of the ablative armor. Likewise, if you've got that glitter cloud out there as a defense, you don't see the laser, but all of a sudden this cloud of like glowing particles just vaporizes in a line. You see this line of these glitter particles just vaporizing. That's dramatic as all hell. It's just tremendous stuff. It really is. It's great. And no one's done that, ever. I'm not aware of anybody ever having done that before. And that is the ultimate thing about entertainment, is it interesting? So the cool thing about that is that it gives you a chance to increase the drama. The tension is when the weapons are fired. The drama is what happens while the weapon is inbound before it either kills you or doesn't. So you can increase the tension by making the initial part of the combat about sensors, and you can increase the drama by having there be a chance of surviving a hit. That chance basically being limited by your countermeasures. And then you get into stuff that's just really cool. If you're going to attack a ship with missiles, then you have lasers on board the ship to take out the enemy missiles. As they come in, they're not designed to kill other ships. They're relatively short-range weapons, but they're countermeasure weapons. And then if you get inside of that, you could have anti-missile missiles that come off of the ship that go after the incoming missiles. And if you get inside of that, you could have just a gun system like the Phalanx, which would be perfectly effective. You just want to stop that missile. And the missile, by the way, is another problem. Even if you use a nuclear missile, you got to get it on target. It's got to touch the target, because you can blow up a nuclear missile not far from a target. And if it can withstand the heat, there is no blast. So all of this stuff is just cool, and it really does it. And explosions are not gasoline explosions. They're just it's a blinding flash of light and just vapor. If you've ever seen the photo of the asteroid that we did the impact on years ago, it's almost a perfect cone because there's no gravity essentially and no atmosphere. Impact, eject a cone like that. No one's done it. So I think it's time to do that, and I think that this will allow us, if we can stay on this kind of level of realism, it allows us to basically take a clean sheet of paper, IP, intellectual property, and put it out there into the hole where Star Trek and Star Wars used to be, and to some degree the Expanse. The Expanse has some very interesting stuff on the physics, but the Expanse is just, to me, just not appealing. It's just not. I don't know why, but it isn't. Although there are elements of it that are great. So just to close this out, next time, I probably won't talk anything next time, but the next time I do another update, I'll have some animation of the first of the two ships that I want to do. I am very tempted to tell two stories simultaneously. The great thing about the show is, to some degree, some people find it interesting. It's nice to know. But talking about it clears things up in my head. I'm toying with the idea of telling two stories simultaneously, even though they're separated in time by a significant period. That's difficult. And it may be so difficult that I may not want to do it. But basically, we have an exploration story, which is like things like the rover going across the terrain and the guys in the sandstorm. Did I not play the sandstorm? I don't think I played the sandstorm. I didn't play the sandstorm, did I? No, it doesn't matter. I've seen it before. I don't. Let me just see because I loaded it. Let me just see, because if not, it's a good example. Rover, one test. I guess it didn't load. I just forgot to. Oh well, worry about it later. Too bad. Yeah, I know I did it last time, but I just dragged it in and it was a mess, and I'm not going to go through that again. So I sat down and I gave this a great deal of thought, a lot of thought in the last several weeks and months. And I thought about it from outside the story. In other words, when you're working on something like this, you think about what kind of story you want to tell, how you would tell it, what's the purpose, what's the goal, what is your, not what's the plot, but what's the theme, what is it you're trying to say. And I like the optimism of Star Trek. I like the exploration of the original series that was never really reproduced ever again. Sense of what the hell is coming up next week. We haven't got the slightest idea. No one's ever been here before. So there's that. And I liked the action and combat sense of Aliens, especially. I thought Aliens was fantastic. That had a pretty good sense of like realism to it. The Marines were a little bit too gabby, but you get the idea. It was really my favorite movie. And I'm trying to put all these things together. And so you tell an exploration tale, and you can have some dramatic threats there in terms of you can discover alien life forms that could be threatening. Although, by the way, you'll be pleased to know this, folks. There's not an animal alive. And it's impossible to imagine an animal that could bite through a Kevlar weapon shell. A Kevlar armor could crunch through that. It just is not even close. The energy that a muscle can deliver is not even close to being able to get through that stuff. So that's just kind of an interesting twist. The idea that somebody's basically in a decent set of armor with rigid armor. It doesn't help him if he gets thrown against a wall or falls 40 stories. He's going to die from G-load. But you could basically stand several elephants on his chest, and that wouldn't kill him if it was a rigid structure. So little things like this. So the whole exploration story is cool because it gives you that sense of like desolate world and on and on and on. And then I've got the whole colonization story, which is, you saw the rover, the first animation I did, since it's here. So you could tell a story where that is a Conestoga wagon, and it's filled with a family. It's not filled with professional explorers. It's a family, and they're in a Conestoga wagon. And as a matter of fact, I'm having a guy design a rover that's big enough to live in. And this is them crossing the plains, and this is them going out to their homestead. And it is lonely, and it is scary. And that's exactly what it was like in the Old West, too. And this is why there's so much storytelling potential here. A Robinson family, yeah, like that, exactly. The fact the first season of Lost in Space, Merlin, was actually kind of cool. Before Dr. Smith became, just a little bit, too gay for Hollywood at Halloween. But this is cool, and if you take the shot that you're looking at now, and then you imagine maybe, I don't know, let's say 10 rovers in a line behind it, all following the same basic trail, then it's like I mentioned before. Your mind is preset for it. You're preset for Galilean combat being translated into space. You're preset for World War II being translated into space. And if you have a line of rovers, then you've got a wagon train. And then you are emotionally prepared for that too. You know where it's going. And again, when I say these things write themselves, it's like if you had, let's say you had 4 rovers and you're going out to this area, you're going to set up you're going to get paid by servicing weather stations or whatever. And let's say you got 4 or 5 guys in rovers, 4 or 5 families, or maybe one of them's like a small company of 3 or 4 guys, partners, whatever. You get 4 or 5 rovers crossing this kind of expanse, right? And they've got enough supplies to get to where they're going. But if on the way, if one of these rovers throws a wheel or 2, or goes into a ravine and cannot be pulled out, this is where the stories write themselves. Because if you've got 5 rovers and one of them is disabled and it's not going to be fixed, then, well, you would say, all right, no problem. You just put the guys from the broken rover into the healthy rovers. Absolutely yes. But what if every single thing you own, every penny you have, all of your personal belongings, everything? What if everything you have is on board that rover? Everything. Would you leave it? You'd leave it if you were sure you were going to die, but if you thought there was a chance to save it, you'd probably save it. And then what happens to the people in the other 4 rovers? Do they stay? They can't stay forever. They don't have limitless supplies. They can stay and try and help the guy for a while, but they can't stay forever. Going to come a point where they're going to have to say to the guy who's got the crippled rover, the Conestoga wagon that's basically thrown a wheel, you basically say, look, we can leave you a little bit of life support stuff. You can come with us now, but we can't stay any longer. So are you coming or are you not? And it's easy to say, well, of course they'd go, but if you had everything in there and you thought there was maybe some chance you could get something restarted, maybe you'd stay. That's just interesting. And what's also interesting is if they decide to abandon their rover and leave everything they have out in the middle of nowhere, then that means that you have to take 4 or 5 people at least and distribute them into other vehicles that are already packed to the gills, and that creates stress and tension and anger and resentment and all of it. Tettleman said distribute the stuff among the other ones. Well, if each rover is filled to the gills with every single thing you own, you could conceivably strap a few more things on there. But one of the things that I'm doing with the design that I'm getting done for the rovers is I'm having them be somewhat modular. Do you want to carry stuff or do you want more living space? And I want to have stuff tied to the side, and I want stuff tied on top. I want it to look like it is just everything we own on this. And this is where the design and the commitment to the realism and the story and all of the universe, all of it. This is what all of this comes together to create a world where the scenarios write themselves. There is an atmosphere. Somebody said a couple times, there's no atmosphere, the beams need to go. I'm aware of that. There are no beams on the moon test that we did earlier. Now, that's interesting. So the question is, Do we tell the whole exploration story first? We're looking, we're going further and further off the map. We finally find the place that we want to be our new home. It's the new world. We found it. And now we need to explore it, colonize it, and defend it, and be prepared for the fact that the Royal Navy's coming. That exploration, so I'm telling the story of America. I've said this from the beginning. I just want to tell America in the future. So you can tell the exploration story of exploring America, discovering America. You can tell the colonization story of the Old West. But you can't really tell that and a combat story, because you have to have at least 13 colonies. I'm going back and forth with the analogy. You got to at least have an organization that can produce a navy, even if it's a little navy. And so do I tell the combat story simultaneously, 20, 40, 30 years in the future, or do I tell it after we do the exploration story? I don't know yet. I'm still playing with it. But they both take care of themselves. And I have some really excellent ship models that I'll bring for you next time. There's one particular designer, he's on the web. Buy one of his models for $60. I wouldn't be the only person who can use that model, but if other people use the model and I get there first, fustest with the mostest, then it's just advertising for our stuff. And again, this is a clean piece of paper IP. I don't have to worry about anybody not liking it. I don't have to worry about. I had some peanuts earlier, and sorry. I don't have to worry about keeping it secret. I don't have to worry about the whole fan fiction thing, and I don't have to worry about any of it. And if you can get Star Trek sense of exploration and wonder and fundamental commitment to science, at least some form of science, and you throw in the kind of rugged, beat-up world, lived-in world that made Star Wars, the first Star Wars movie, so attractive. The stuff looked like it was used. It wasn't spotless like it was in 2001. It was beaten up. People used it. If you could take that and put it together with a form of combat that was clearly realistic in the way that Crimson Tide covered it, but still nothing anyone had ever seen before, then you might have the ability to put together a franchise, and now you got a $1 billion property. People are saying, "Show us the shirt." This was designed by Sabo. There it is. Anyway, that's where we are right now. Thanks for your indulgence. I love talking about this stuff. I can't get enough of it. Let's do some political questions. Why don't we? And so on and so on. So let's go to our fabulous Facebook page, and we'll take it from there. Where are you? Here we go. $49 comments. All right, so we'll do a couple here, several. We'll see what's going on after that. Steve Young, top band. Is there a future for our federalist form of republic when mayors shirk their responsibility for public safety and governors of the same ilk stand down? If the feds step in the way, they're pilloried for being tyrants. Great question, Steve. And I think the answer to this is, while it's all exceedingly depressing right now, a 3-minute limit. Dave, bless your heart. Aren't you a dear boy? I'll make them fast as I can. 3 minutes. Takes me 3 minutes to warm up. I think what's going on now is exceedingly depressing to watch. But if you take the long term, I think it's nothing but good for us, for the country, because we are now experiencing federalism. We're seeing which cities are open, which ones are closed, which states are respecting people's freedoms, which states turned out to have elected people who are absolute tyrants, and it comes a bit of a shock to some people. It's not a shock in California. It might have been a bit of a shock in Michigan. Maybe not. I don't know. But we're finding the answers, and as more and more time goes by, and more look, the COVID thing is going to be determined by something very simple. I've said this from the beginning, and it's panic fatigue. And here's the issue. And again, I just have to get this. I have to get this said in advance, I mean no disrespect for anybody who's lost anything by this. And again, this is not a hoax. This may be the third or fourth leading cause of death this year in this country. But with that said, I don't know anybody who's died of COVID-19, and I don't know anybody who knows of anybody who's died of COVID-19. I'm not saying that this hasn't happened. Please, again, I mean no disrespect for anybody. But what it comes down to is this: if you're being asked to give up your business, give up your restaurant, give up your life, your everything, and there are people dying, just dropping in the streets like it's Omega Man or something, you can say, okay, well, it's this or end of the civilization. But given the fatality rate of this and the fact that it's a picky eater, means that we don't get to see most of the fatalities because most of them happen in nursing homes, which is a tragedy. My mom's in a nursing home. But if people are not going to, I can sum this up, people are not going to be willing to ruin their lives, watch their entire businesses, life savings, food, everything. They're not going to watch that go unless they see people dropping dead outside and realize it's either we either do the quarantine and the masks or else I'm going to die. And when I get to the point where I don't know anybody who's died, what is this? I don't know anybody who's died of COVID-19, and I don't know anybody who does, then that says that this disease is not serious enough to justify what we've been put up with. And Freelancer 60 says, I got to watch the final scene for the deaths of more New York. What is he? Saw the end of Omega Man. I got to watch the final scene of Omega Man. That's pretty cool. Charlton Heston, you get your money's worth out of that guy, boy. You pay a $6 ticket and you get $30 of acting from Charlton Heston. I love that movie, actually. I remember the calendar on the wall that said, I think it was March 15th, 1975. It was March, I think, of 1975. That's when the world ended in the future. That's a cool movie. But, Steve, what I'm saying to answer your question about the federalist system is yes. People now are learning about federalism. They're learning that if you live in one state, you don't have to live by the same rules as living in another state. They're learning in California that people are going about their business in Texas, and despite the fact that the news media is trying to tell you that people are dying like flies, they're not. Their fatality rate isn't higher than anywhere else. So in the end, I think this is actually going to be good for federalism. And I think Donald Trump, as a general rule, has played this well by making it the kind of thing where we will come in and help anybody who asks us, but basically it's a problem of states and cities. But I do think that we need to see more of Donald Trump, and I haven't seen much of him lately, and I think that's really a big mistake. I think he needs to be out in front of this, cheerleading the freedom side of it much more. But look, the Democratic Party in 2020 is going to be the party of street riots, defunding policemen, and the destruction of statues in all of our history. That's what the Democrats are going to run on in 2020. I think, in fact, I'm quite convinced that they are in for a very, 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 very big surprise. So we'll see. Next one's from Steve, so I'm going to pass. Sorry, Steve. Martin Archer. Income tax is no different to the taxes paid by the peasants to the landowners in feudal times. Correct. As such, I'd posit that's akin to cruel and unusual punishment. Now, I know that if you wanted to get all lawyerly on me, the wording only applies to the part of the Constitution addressing crime, but the Constitution is about morality as well, and I regard income tax as immoral, divisive. It foments envy between citizens, all true, and punitive. Trump's tax cuts have proven that the government treasury could get more money with less taxation. To my eye, a tax on consumption is the only moral tax. It would promote thrift and eliminate the undermining effect of punishing work done. Yes. I couldn't have put it better myself. I'm tempted to just say, next question. Yeah, that's exactly right. A consumption tax, and there's other benefits to a sales tax, a consumption tax. First of all, income tax, if you're one of those people who thinks that you need to soak the rich, like movie stars like Matt Damon, he can agree to say that because Matt Damon doesn't actually have a tremendous amount of income. He makes millions of dollars, but but he doesn't have enormous amounts of income. He has enormous amounts of wealth. And if you don't understand that difference, then you got some thinking to do. He has a lot of wealth, but he has very little income. Same's true for Bill Gates and Zuckerman and all the rest of them. Income tax punishes the middle class. It doesn't take any money really away from the wealthy. It puts a ding in them, but they're not making their money from. They're not getting income in the way that we understand it. A sales tax, however, hits everybody exactly equally, and that's why it's fair. I don't get to stand in line at a 4th of July barbecue and check your wallet in front of you to see if you should be paying for some of my food. If you're buying steaks and, Heinekens, and I'm buying, ground chuck and Schlitz, then we're both paying the same percentage, but you're giving more money to the state than I am. It's obviously the only way to go, and the arguments for it are just numerous. But one of them is the argument that I think is a good argument, because I know our enemies, our political enemies. You can say to the left, listen, if you think that rich people should pay for stuff, then this is the only way to get them to pay for it. They buy stuff, and the stuff they buy is expensive. If you want to take money from rich people, then the way to take money from rich people is to make it a sales tax, because people buy things, and then we're all on the same table. But see, if we're all on the same table and we're all in this together, then there's no reason to be a Democrat, and there's no goodie bag to hand out. If it's a sales tax, then there's no saying, hey, poor person, the rich people have all of your money, the money that you earned, they stole from you, so we're going to go take that money from them and give it to you if you vote for me. If everybody's paying the same percentage, then that goes away, and that's why it won't go away until the Democrats, or the progressives anyway, go away. And it's voluntary. In other words, if I don't want to pay for this, then I don't buy it. Boom. And another benefit that's not often talked about is a sales tax essentially eliminates all criminal activity and black market activity in terms of taxation. There is no black market, and there is no under the table. Everybody gets paid under the table. Everybody gets paid under the table. But you got to buy above the table. And that means criminals, drug dealers who are buying $400,000 yachts, they're paying their share. It should be an easy sale, but nobody on our side knows how to do these things. Eric Blake. Hey, Bill. Hey, Eric. Here's something I've long been very irritated at: the use of the term common courtesy, for simple reason that it has always implied to me the idea of shrugging off people being decent and well courteous to each other as just meh, common, no big deal. In other words, not something worth propping up and celebrating in our lives, let alone the culture. In my admittedly not so humble opinion, it's this attitude that's led to our society not being so courteous anymore. Politics, media, you name it. In other words, not so common anymore, is it? What do I think? Well, common courtesy is like common sense, not so common as it used to be. The first thought I had reading this was to be reminded, I think it was Chris Rock, I'm not entirely sure. But, I think it was Chris Rock who said, he was talking about, well, I think he was talking about the black community. I'm not 100% sure. So, well, I'm taking care of my kids, and he's saying, "What do you want, a cookie for that? You're supposed to take care of your kids. You don't get a medal for doing the right thing. You don't get a medal for doing the right thing. You're supposed to be doing these things." I find that people are. I'm going to try and keep these answers shorter today, and this is something that we can chew on and think about for next time. But this is the honest truth, Eric. I have sat in a Chick-fil-A in Torrance, which is not a super upscale neighborhood, and I have watched people become more polite as they enter the building. I'm serious. I was there a lot when I was working at PJTV, and I watched people get more polite as they entered the building, because Chick-fil-A is so fantastically polite, so clean, so well ordered, so just like aggressively friendly, that people rose to that standard. And I've seen people get progressively nastier when they enter a building as well. So it's all about the culture. My wife never ever ceases to be amazed by how friendly Americans are. And we were out for a walk. We usually go around walking late last night around the neighborhood. Often go for a late walk. And there was somebody out there walking their dog at 2 in the morning or something. And Natasha said, hello. And the guy said, hi. And she said, have a good evening. He said, you too. Have a good evening too. And she just giggled. She couldn't get over it. Just the fact that she would you'd never do that in Russia, ever. People think something's wrong with you in Russia if you did that. So she's very happy to live in a polite company of people, and so am I. And we still are a tremendously open and friendly society. And it depends on your neighborhood, man. People, it's a cultural thing, and it is something that needs to be protected, which is kind of why we're here. Let's see, Martin Archer again, so I'm going to pass. Merlin, how are you, buddy? Privilege is a granted advantage like the front of the bus, the chilled drinking fountain, or affirmative action. Isn't most of what the left calls privilege simply advantage? I don't even know that it's advantage. Look, I have an opinion about privilege, and it's not. I'll just tell you what I think privilege is. White privilege doesn't exist because this privilege is not race-based, it's not sex-based, it's not gender-based, it's none of those things. I am a privileged person, but I'm not privileged because I'm white, because I spent, honestly, 30 years of my life without ever having 4 consistent digits in the bank. I mean, I spent 30 years of my life going from genuine, real poverty, like I'm 6'1" and 119 pounds because I don't have money for food. That was 10 years of my life. So I know what this is about. But I do have privilege, and the privilege is that I was raised in such a way so that I don't have anyone to blame for my failures except for me, and that's my privilege. And to the degree, if we're not talking about individuals but culturally, that's white privilege. White privilege, to the degree that it exists, is the freedom from being told that other people are responsible for your failures. And if you believe that other people are responsible for your failures, and if you believe that there's a giant cabal of powerful people that keep you down, you now have got the new, you've got the progressive paradigm for governance. You basically tell people that there's a conspiracy of white people, or fill in the blank. It was Jews in Germany prior to the war and still everywhere else. So basically what happens is you tell people, hey, the reason you're not successful is because there's a powerful group of people who are determined to keep you down. And if you vote for me, I'll take stuff from them and give it to you. But the reason this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy is because if you go out and try and you fail, then you've been told that the reason you failed is because of other people's actions behind the scenes. And if you try once or twice, then you believe that this is the case, that they're more powerful than you are, and then you're left with nothing but rage and anger and a desire to burn things, and a desire to find people who will take away the stuff that you wanted to get but you couldn't get because these forces were aligned against you. Privilege is the draw, the luck of the draw, of having grown up in a house where that isn't true. Largely, to some degree, that means white, because this has been drilled into Black Americans for so long by people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who was being shown the exit by Booker T. Washington. He's one of the 7 people I'm going to write about in the next Daily Wire series, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington at the Tuskegee Institute, for those of you not familiar with the story, his attitude was, we cannot expect to be treated as equals, and we cannot expect prejudice that's been around for thousands of years to go away if we come to white America with our hat in our hand. So Booker T. Washington says we need to educate ourselves, we need to start our own businesses and do business with each other, and then as time comes, we will enter the white community as equals with money, buying things from them and having them compete for our dollars. And he said, he's a child of a slave. Our children may have to be farmers so that their children can be mechanics, so that their children can be doctors. And that's his attitude. And when he started the Tuskegee Institute, which was the first higher level university for blacks in the country, he had the students build the college. They just went out and built it. They bought the raw materials and built it with their own hands. And furthermore, they also had at Tuskegee a very large, significant farm. They grew their own food. They raised their own livestock, and so that attitude wasn't just something that was spoken. He basically he did two things. He inculcated a sense of pride in his students because they could see that they had made it on their own and nobody had helped them. Everything they'd gotten was theirs. And furthermore, he showed the people that said that black Americans were not capable of succeeding without whites constantly helping them, showed them they were just wrong. He partnered with a guy, I've forgotten his name now, it'll be in the segment, the guy who owned Sears Roebuck at the time, and his name wasn't Sears or Roebuck. But he convinced him to put up enough money. I think they built 7 schools throughout the South, and it was such a successful program that the guy started a foundation. And this guy, working with Booker T. Washington, built 5,000 schools throughout the South for black children and no cost to the government. 5,000 of them. When they finally had got some of the stuff going in there, and they had a little bit of a track record, the most astonishing thing about the Tuskegee Institute is not only did the students in Booker T. Washington's college have higher test score averages than white Americans, they also had a higher legitimacy rate. In other words, they were better parents. They were more married families at Tuskegee than there were outside of it. And it's the second greatest tragedy of this country. If slavery is the first, then not listening to Booker T. Washington and listening to W.E.B. Du Bois was the second biggest mistake we made. I was thinking about this as I was coming out of the shower before I came over here. I thought, the reason that they didn't go with Booker T. Washington was because Booker T. Washington's pathway was hard, and W.E.B. Du Bois's path was easy, and it was easier for blacks and whites. It was easier for blacks because they didn't have to get up and build schools, and go through all of the racial injustice and all of that because of their desire for learning. They didn't have to do all of that. They could basically sit there and simmer in their own anger. And it was easier for whites because it allowed them to maintain their sense of racial superiority. Okay, so the slaves are free, and that got settled by force of arms. So now, as long as these black people are dependent on us and our largesse, it really means that we're better than they are. They couldn't make it on their own. And he basically is one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. And rock rib Republican Teddy Roosevelt, Republican president, invited him to dinner at the White House after Booker T. Washington wrote his book Up From Slavery. And this so outraged Democrats that I'm gonna have to talk to the guys at Daily Wire about this because it's ultimately their decision. I personally think we ought to directly quote what these Democrats said. One of the future governors of South Carolina said, "We're going to have to kill 1,000 niggers now to get these niggers to understand their place again." Once Booker T. Washington had dinner at the White House with President Roosevelt. And another guy who was a sitting senator from another state, one of them was going to be governor of Mississippi, the other was a senator from South Carolina, I can't remember which one. He said, well, now the smell of niggers is so pervading the White House that the rats are coming out from the stables. And he said, I don't care more for Booker T. Washington than I do any other coconut-eating monkey who blacks my shoes. I think none of them are capable of handling the glorious cause of democracy, something like that. That's what Democrats said when a Republican invited a black Republican to have dinner in the White House. And people need to know that. So that's it. Steve Young. Are you okay, Bill? You look like pounded dog stuff. the other day on Backstage. I did. I was falling asleep. Talked about that at the beginning, Steve. Hope you had a chance to see it. I was very tired. Then I was very, very tired. And then on the drive home, I just got that pulled muscle or something, had a cough, went to the hospital, took a couple days of real rest. That's why I missed the show last week and why I didn't even have time to post that I was missing the show, because I was getting chest x-rays and all the rest of the stuff. But I'm fine. Much better. Thank you. Thank you for your concern. I was looking like pounded dog stuff. I'm going to try to keep this down to less than 3 exceptions to the no profanity rule that I try to maintain here. But thanks for asking. Charles Domes. Was Buckaroo Banzai demonstrating a character flaw when he had to search his bedroom for his matched pistols and holsters? Well, congratulations there, Charles. You've just asked the most meta question in the history of the Stratosphere Lounge. All right, I'm going to come out with this. Here's my answer to your question. Buckaroo Banzai wasn't that he was demonstrating a character flaw when he had to search his bedroom for his matched pistols and holsters. Buckaroo Banzai demonstrated a character flaw by having matched pistols and holsters. That's kind of a, that's a little precious, I think. Trying to find some new ones. Here's our friend Dave Olson. The initial burst of enthusiasm for astronauts Bob and Doug seems to have waned. Will it pick up next week when they attempt re-entry? Is SpaceX just doing a poor job of PR, or is space travel and exploration less interesting to the public than we think? Good question. I was thinking about Bob and Doug the other day. Think about it this way, Dave. If you were in charge of publicity at SpaceX, and you decided that the strategy was to keep Bob and Doug in the public eye for the last, 5-6 weeks now, when they aren't doing anything, yes, they're in space, yes, but if you tried to force that down people's throats, would you think you would succeed? I think it's absolutely smart. I think we just launched the first men on a private vehicle to the space station. Never happened before. Went flawlessly. Bob and Doug are great guys. Bob and Doug now have entered the world of NASA. There's a field the answer's starting to develop already. Dave is starting to come to me like a burst of religion. The reason you haven't heard from Bob and Doug the last 5 weeks, folks, is because they've been basically doing NASA stuff, which means nothing. But they will be coming home, and when they come home, we'll cover that, and hopefully they'll come home safely, and that means we can send Bob and Doug and a whole bunch of others up more, and it's more we send them up, the less time they have to do NASA stuff, which isn't worth recording anyway, because nothing happens on the space station. Nothing happens on the space station. And nothing happens on the space station because we decided that in order to get the space stations, we had to cooperate with Russia. And in order to cooperate with Russia, we had to move the orbital inclination of the station so high in order so that the Russians could get to it, that now it is so heavily inclined to the ecliptic that we can no longer use, or really never were able to use the International Space Station as an assembly point for exploring the solar system, or even the moon for that matter. It's useless. It's a Potemkin station. Excuse me one moment. This is a little important. Sorry about that. So, no, I think they're doing the right thing. Don't oversell it, undersell it, and have it be an event. If it's an event, it's an event. That's the art of it's a psychology really of good advertising. I'll tell you, I never really understood it until I was I don't want to say a victim of it because I put myself in this spot, but masters of this. Dave, is the Star Citizen marketing. They have all of these in-game spaceships that you can purchase. Some of them aren't even existing yet. When I say you can purchase them, you can't. They're not for sale. They make them available for sale once or twice a year. And because you can't just buy it, you want to. And then comes a point when it's like, okay, and that means they can charge pretty much whatever they want to for it. And This intentional denial, there's a marketing term for it that's similar to that. I don't know what the actual term is. Is it enforced scarcity? Something like that. Is a powerful, powerful, powerful thing. And I think they're doing it just right. I think they should just make Bob and Doug and whoever follows them up there should be in the news when they're doing something newsworthy. Artificial scarcity, says John Pershing. Okay. But it's very powerful, and I think they ought to stick to that. Let's see, moving on. Sonia Fay. Question, when are militias going to form guerrilla groups to infiltrate Antifa and BLM and take them down from the inside? Sonia, I hope that doesn't ever happen. I was given a real kind of an ethical quandary that lasted a whole, 30 seconds on the last Bill Whittle Now, where we talked about, was the one with the Yosemite Sam thumbnail. Who was that unmasked man? Guy walked into a retail store in Texas. The retail store policy was you must wear a mask. The guy wasn't wearing a mask. Some junior teenager clerk said, I'm sorry, sir, you have to wear a mask if you're going to be in here. And the guy says, I have a concealed carry permit. What are you going to do about it? It pains me to say this, but that guy needs to get off the property, and if he doesn't, or if he makes another threat that's more aggressive, he needs to be arrested. And I am reluctant to say that because God knows I agree with him about the Second Amendment, and I also agree with them about the masks. But the bottom line is, he's on private property. They can do whatever they want to. And furthermore, threatening people who are not threatening you is it's not appropriate. You don't pull a gun in a saloon. If you pull a gun in a saloon and point it to somebody, then don't be surprised when you get shot. By saying that, this is the only way you can understand these things. I've used this term before. I didn't come up with it, but it made this clear for me. I never understood why my dad said, if you ever point a gun at somebody, you better pull the trigger. It never made sense to me until it suddenly did. And the only way to understand this, Sonia, is the reason I'm saying all this is because I don't want Americans breaking the law. And I just don't see any reason why we should have to. The thing to understand about what that guy did at the store is he raised the level of ambient risk to an unacceptable level. And I can give you a good example of ambient risk because I was finished with the shows yesterday, and I decided to go to Five Guys for a bacon cheeseburger, which I ate outdoors on the patio because I'm allowed to do that here in the People's Republic. And I was sitting there eating my cheeseburger, minding my own business, and all of a sudden I heard this shouting, and I turned around, and just directly behind me, this is Ventura Boulevard, it's fairly large, it's a two-way street, it's a major artery. There was a relatively young woman, although she looked like she was in her 40s or 50s, obviously done a lot of drugs, and she was standing in the street, and she was just in the middle of the road. She says, I'm stronger than all of you, God damn it, and cursing and swearing, and people are stopping their cars, and she's in the middle of the road, and she crossed to the other side, and nearly got hit, and she's screaming and yelling, and just, and people are, they're going about their business. I look up, I see 15 people on their cell phones calling 911. So I go back to eating my cheeseburger because I know that this has already been taken care of. And this was going on behind me, and I was reading at the time, and I realized that I can't concentrate on the reading now because I have to be concentrating on what this crazy woman is doing behind me here. She wasn't within striking distance, or else I would have never taken my eyes off her, but I could hear it back there. I couldn't concentrate on my reading. And the reason I couldn't concentrate on my reading was because this woman had raised the level of ambient risk significantly. When I'm sitting there, I'm certainly as likely to get hit by a meteor as I would be whether she was raving or not. So there's certain ambient risk that we're all ready to take. There was a microscopic possibility that a car could have jumped the curb, although I can't even imagine that, or I could have been a victim of a drive-by. But that's actually a good example too. I was typical. I was comfortable with the level of risk because it's the level of risk in 21st century America in Sherman Oaks. And that level of risk is so small. It's probably the smallest level of ambient risk that has ever existed in human history. So I'm out there enjoying myself and reading my book, my ebook on my iPad. But when this person started screaming and yelling and obviously out of her mind, either schizophrenic or drugs or both, now my level of ambient risk has increased significantly. This person may have a knife. She may decide that I'm her long-lost uncle, whatever. And so now I can't concentrate on my reading. Now it turns out that she did not raise the level of ambient risk very much, but she did it enough so that I wasn't able to concentrate on what I was doing anymore because I had to be, and that's not a bad thing on my part. The reason I couldn't read was because, appropriately enough, now I had to start paying attention to something in the environment that may or may not be a threat, but is certainly unusual. So, by the way, the cops arrived. They handcuffed her. And by the way, the second the police cars started to turn the corner, she looks down and just starts walking off she's just texting. The police detained her, put her in handcuffs for a while, for 20, 30 minutes, I guess. And then they let her go. And she walked quietly down the street. And about 2 or 3 minutes later, she was back in the middle of the street screaming and yelling again. I think they came back again, and this time they didn't just let her walk away. But in any event, that's what that guy did when he said to the clerk who's just doing his job. And the store, as I said on the show, the store can have any policy it wants to. I'm a complete purist when it comes to private property. If they want to say, no, we don't allow conservative pundits whose first name is Bill into the store, then that's their business. I go shopping somewhere else. But he had no business doing that. And so while I think Antifa's not, Sonia, Antifa is not a serious threat to the country. A serious threat to the country is why we haven't done more to stop them, but they're not a serious threat to the country. They're not serious people. And the reason I say they're not serious people is because they're violent when they've got a mask on and no one is opposing them. If you ever see Antifa when the Proud Boys are there or motorcycle gang or veterans, they run for the hills. And furthermore, not too long ago, there was a video about Antifa basically blocked the car or approached the window of this black man, and he got out of there and just basically grabbed this guy by the front of the shirt and put him up against this light post, as I remember, and started yelling at this guy. And the guy was either a former cop or a current cop or a Marine DI, seems more likely. But what was interesting to me about that was he's surrounded by all these Antifa guys, and he went at this guy and put him up against the wall or whatever it was and started yelling at him. And everybody in Antifa took like 15 steps back. That's not somebody to be afraid of. Somebody to be afraid of would be if the guy goes after the guy like that and immediately they jump him and curb stomp him to death. They're just... the guy in Austin pointed an AK at a car and won a Darwin Award, did he? Oh, Movo Moto, well done. Soy Tifa, yeah. They're mostly rich white kids who've never been allowed to do male things and never been allowed to play cowboys and Indians, and this is their chance to be all rebellious and feel like men, which is, what is this? It's not, I should wear white shirts from now on. I'm not saying it's trivial. It's not trivial. We need to immediately. We, as usual, our lack of action is what's caused this to happen. If we'd gone in and arrested these people in the beginning, we wouldn't be seeing this. Giuliani said it. I've said it on the show many times since then. Giuliani said, when I was mayor of New York, we would allow people to protest. If somebody threw a rock at a police car, we'd arrest that person. If a second person threw a rock at a police car, we'd arrest that person. And if a third person threw a rock at a police car, we'd arrest that person. And there would be no fourth people throwing rocks at police cars from that point. And John, you mentioned something about a guy who pointed an AK-47. Did that? I didn't hear the story. Did the guy get killed? Did somebody shoot him? I don't know the story, but the Darwin Award usually goes to people who take themselves out of the gene pool. Be curious to know. AK guy dead. I got to read that story. I don't know anything about it now. I'll look it up as soon as we're done. We'll be done soon here, I think. Cheryl Toomey. Anyway, like I said, Sonia, we shouldn't have to break the law. I think militias and people who are heavily armed and prepared for things are fine, but that doesn't give them the right to break the law. Gives them the right to protect themselves, certainly, but doesn't give them the right to go in and break the law. It's what we have law enforcement for. And we have an attorney general that seems to understand the concept now for the first time in 10 years. So I think this will be the last one I do because I'm seeing a lot of repeats here. I'll do Henry Lumley after that too, but everything else is somebody I've done at least one question for. Cheryl Toomey. Bill, in trying to convince a friend to watch TSL tonight, he asked if you think America should have more than two parties. His quote, thinking about it, how can pluralism be properly allowed at all with only two parties? That feels like the U.S. can be barely called democratic. This might completely blow your mind, but what if there were 4 Republican parties and 4 conservative parties and the voter could choose between them which one he thinks aligns most with his ideals? This might be incompatible with a black and white worldview, but two people with the same school of thought can actually think differently. I didn't know how to respond to that. What exactly are your views on the two-party system? Thanks. This is one of those questions, Cheryl, that I've never thought about before. It feels just like a Bill Whittle now question, and I felt immediately the second I read it is that the answer actually seems pretty simple to me. The reason that a two-party system is stable is because whoever wins the election wins the majority. Period. Any other questions? I mean, it sounds like a difficult problem, but when you really get down to it, it's not. If there were 20 parties and the party with the most votes won, and they won with 7% of the vote, and everybody else had 6s and 5s or whatever the case may be, do you think that would be a governable situation in this country? No. The reason that the two-party system is stable in America is because the ultimate expression of democracy, of voting, of all of it, the ultimate expression is, I was outvoted. The majority rules. Everybody understands this. We're wired for this. This is. I'm not joking about this. This is something that's hardwired into human morality. If I want to do something and more people than I don't want to do something, you can at least comfort yourself by saying, all right, I was outvoted. I don't like it, and maybe I'll leave, and there's a lot of things I can do if I don't like it. But I was outvoted. And that was my attitude towards Obama. I think the guy was a fraud. I don't think he was legally president for a number of reasons. All that's my opinion. But the fact is, he was elected president, and I was outvoted. So that's that. This is the thing that Democrats, or progressives anyway, are incapable of doing. And I don't see how having two parties means that the U.S. can barely be called democratic. Because frankly, if you take your friend's logical, if you take your friend to his logical conclusion, there could be no democracy, a real democracy, unless there's a political party that agrees with me on 100% of everything. And when you get right down to it, we're all a political party of one. There's nobody who has the exact same political views as I do. Nobody on this earth has the same political views as you either, exactly. There are general things that we agree with, and that's why we are basically sent to one party or another. But to say that we don't have enough choices is somehow limiting my freedom to vote or my democracy or my sense of democracy is just plain wrong. If you have two people, you have to choose between two people. If you have four people, you have to choose between four people. If you have 20 people, you have to choose between 20 people. That's not the point. The point is that that person is going to represent me. Now, it's true. He's absolutely right. You could make a case that if you had 20 parties, you could probably find somebody who was more tuned into your specific philosophy and political views than somebody than in a two-party system. There's no denying that's true. But you also have to come to grips with the fact that ultimately democracy depends upon, I understand we're a republic, but we elect our representatives. So this is a correct use of democracy. Ultimately, we agree that we will, as long as every one of us has a say, we will agree to abide by the results. That's how it works. And having 4 parties or 8 parties, as he said, is not. It's still a representative. You're still sending somebody to do your bidding. You're not in a true democracy. Now, if you want to make the point that a republic is not a real democracy, then that is at least a logical position. But the outcome of that position is every single citizen has to make a vote on every single thing that happens. And not only do we not have time for that, we don't have time for that. So the republic is the best existing structure so far. If somebody can think of a better one, great. But automatically having more parties doesn't do it. I was in Australia for an election, I want to say it was 1996, I think. And Australia has this kind of, Chinese calculus voting system where the first vote, where you basically list the votes in order. I want this guy first, this guy second, third, fourth, fifth, so on. And they all have points assigned, and it's impenetrable. And they're very proud of that. At least people I talk to down there, they're saying, "See, this is democracy. I get to pick my first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and fifth choice, and so on and so on and so on." And it sounds great. But the problem is that if most people are opposed on 2 different issues, take abortion for the sake of the argument, or guns, whatever, then all of the people who are pro-abortion are voting for one guy, and out of the 5, the other guy who's the most anti-abortion is at the bottom. And likewise, the other side is doing that too. So these 2 people who represent best the positions of most of the people in the country have their votes canceled out, and the person who gets elected is the person who is least distasteful to either side. And that's so what ends up happening in a situation like that is you end up with nobody's first choice. And there was another part to it, but that's basically it. And he's not only not anybody's real first choice, but he is won because he's captured 17% of the vote. There's a much more important reason really for 2 parties, and that's simply this. 2 parties in America provides a great deal of political stability for this rambunctious family of people that we're a part of. Because a 2-party system, what's the word I'm looking for? A 2-party system, I know exactly what I'm thinking. I'm just trying to think about the best way to put it. A 2-party system incorporates and moderates the radicals. That's what it does. If you have 15 parties, you can have the Green Party, and we all know what the Greens are about. And if they get 8% of the vote and everybody gets less, then guess what? Then the Greens are running your country. In a 2-party system, if you're an environmental activist, then you're going to become a Democrat. And all radical opinions eventually, Ohio Coast, you got it exactly right. It buffers the extremes. That's exactly what it does. It buffers the extremes. So if you're the kind of person who believes that America should be a Christian nation, exclusively Christian nation, if you're not a Christian, you should leave, and you go to the polls and it turns out there's a Christian party and you vote for them, maybe they'll win. And maybe then they will have the force of law behind them to demand that everyone who's not a Christian either converts or leaves the country. I don't want to live in a country like that, but it's possible that they could get enough votes to be able to pull it off. Now, if you have 2 parties, then that party is going to go for Republicans. There's going to be a lot about Republicans that they don't like, in fact, most of it, but they will vote Republican because if there was to be a Christian party right now, it wouldn't get I don't know, might get 2% of the votes. I mean, it's certainly not going to win. And so the question is, well, do I throw my vote away on a vote? The Libertarians are a great example of this. Do I throw my vote away on Libertarians, or do I think that the Republicans or the Democrats are a bigger threat to individual personal freedom? People vote Libertarian out of conscience, but they know that they're never going to win. So they, generally speaking, move to the middle. You could make a case that there shouldn't be any political parties at all, and that was certainly Washington's position, and I think that's a much more interesting take on it. But then again, Washington was right. George Washington was right. There's a lot about political parties and factionalism that's dangerous and bad. But the bottom line is to deny that to say that there shouldn't be or make it illegal to have political parties is to simply drive underground what will happen anyway. People make deals. People make arrangements with each other. That's all there is to it. It's part of human activity. It's a fundamental part of human activity. If you make parties illegal, then people will make deals under the table because they understand that it's to their advantage to cooperate with people who also have similar goals in mind. I'll vote for you for this, you vote for me for that, and I'd rather have them do it in public than do it, under the table. So what your friend is arguing is that he's arguing that he doesn't have as much sway over the results as he would like, but he's one out of 320 million people, and he has 320 millionth. I'm obviously not taking the whole population as voting, but you get the idea. If you are saying that a two-party system is barely democratic because it doesn't allow you as many choices as you want, what you're basically saying is, I'd like a system where there are 8 political parties because one of them agrees with me much more closely than just one of the two, and therefore, if that party existed, I could vote for them, and then my values would be transmitted to the rest of society, even though that party won with 16% of the vote. That's anti-democratic. I'm going to do one more, I think. Yeah, just because this is a new one, and then we're going to call it a night. 2 of them from Henry Lumley. I'm going to take the second one. Hey, Bill Whittle, after listening to your sci-fi and Unreal Engine discussions, I recommended that my son start watching Unreal tutorials on YouTube and start learning some skills instead of merely watching YouTube gaming all the time. Do you have any recommendations for Unreal tutorials for a brand new Unreal user? I just downloaded Unreal today, so we are just getting started. I also showed him some pilot training videos for some solo flights, and hopefully I set that particular hook in deep enough. I wanted to get my pilot's license, and even though the required textbooks for flight lessons here the required textbooks for flight lessons here in Canada, but I've never had enough money to actually start the lessons. Hopefully I can keep him interested enough to enter the Air Cadets here and stay in until he can get his license. If you're in Air Cadets here in Canada, you can start at 12 and get your powered flight and glider license by 16 for essentially free, so that would be cool. Okay, so a lot to unpack there. Yes, first of all, Henry, by all means, the Air Cadets sound great, and flying is expensive, and flight instruction is even more expensive, and that's just the way it is. There's an interesting tie-in here. I soloed a glider in 7 hours. That was the record for the field, anyway. And the reason I soloed a glider in 7 hours was because by the time I took my first flight lesson, I had well over 3,000 hours of flying time in simulator, easily over that, much over that. And those were on sims that began with Microsoft Flight Simulator 1, where the mountains were a single jagged line that you could fly, past. So what I'm trying to say is, in the same way that if you want to go to an expensive college and you can't afford it, probably a good idea to go to like community college for the first 2 years because you're going to be taking those same classes anyway. Why pay all of this money to take English Lit 101 when you can take it at community college and not spend the money? You can save a significant amount of money by spending a lot of time in a simulator. And again, this was in very primitive days with just a simple joystick now. Now, I mean, they're not completely inexpensive, but they're not crazy out of reach. You can buy control yokes, throttle quadrants and stuff. And Flight Simulator X, Flight Simulator 10 was a pretty good flight sim. But Flight Sim 2020 is getting to be virtually indistinguishable from the real world. That does a couple things. First of all, it will do a fair amount to calm down the flying Jones. You know, they gotta go flying. Flying in the sim is not as much fun as flying in the real world, but it's not as nasty as flying in the real world either, and considerably safer when you get right down to it. If you get to the point where looking out the window in a real airplane is indistinguishable from looking out the window in a simulator, you start to reach an entirely different set of moral questions, which I don't want to get into right now, but it would certainly be worth talking about at some point in the future. But my point here is this. If you decide to follow the course that you're talking about, I recommend you do. I would recommend you buy the computer with the fastest graphic card you can afford, and get Flight Sim. And if you want to be a pilot, flight simulators will give you, I don't know, 80% of that, maybe, something. Without question, you will learn the fundamental skills that you need without having to pay for them again. If you're serious about a private pilot's license, I would recommend you get a control yoke, which is just an ISB plug-in instead of a joystick, which is more of a fighter kind of thing. I did nothing but joysticks, and transition to a yoke was not particularly tough for me, because once I got into powered flying, I just refused to fly an airplane that had a control yoke. Everything I flew and has had a stick. I just love it. But that's not the case for most people. I flew Katanas and a Katana Diamond Eclipse, and the Sky Arrow was a side stick, and the Long Easy was a side stick. But realistically, I said US something other than USB, didn't I? Say USP, doesn't matter anyway. So this is good. The rudder pedals are included. All of it's great, and I have no doubt that there are flying tutorials built into Flight Simulator 2020. Henry, I recommend you just take a quick look, and it's not out yet, but just do a YouTube search for Flight Simulator 2020. It'll blow your mind. Regarding the Unreal stuff, this is your strategy is entirely correct. I'm not hesitating because I have any problem with what you're doing. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a smart idea, and I think it's an idea that will likely pay off. The only hesitation I have on this is that it seems like the very best minds in the country now are going into games. And that's understandable, because that's where the money is. And it's fun. There's just something about it I find a little off-putting. I can't really put my finger on it. But with that said, Unreal is the way to go. They say Unity is free, but Unreal is free too. Unity is more open source, so the assets apparently are better. Unreal and Unity are the only real two players out there. And I just think Unreal looks a lot better. I think there are many more people coding in Unreal, and I think one of the problems, in fact, the single great problem for Star Citizen, is that they decided to go with CryEngine, which was an obsolete engine when they made the decision, and now they've modified it so much they can't even get updates. If I was going to take over Star Citizen, I'd probably do it from scratch in Unreal 5, but that's not my decision. Unreal is the way to go. Unreal is the way to go in the same way that if you have a blog, then you should go with WordPress. WordPress has thousands of plugins, and WordPress isn't going anywhere. It's well supported. The thing that's most amazing about Unreal, and that's all the animations you saw earlier in the show were Unreal Engine, is that it's absolutely free. It's 100% free. And I thought, man, that's a brilliant business model. Unreal works like this. You can download it, you can play with it, design games with it, all of that. Fantastic. And cinematics, which is the stuff that you saw me do, is free. The most powerful software in the world for what I want to do, and it doesn't cost me a penny. 3D Studio can be a couple $1,000s a year, and some of these other things. But Unreal is free. And it's free because Epic Games, that owns Unreal Engine, basically is smart enough to say, why don't we really open source this? In other words, we can license this software, this engine, this amazing engine, amazing engine. We can make people pay for it, but the more we make them pay for it, the more money we'll make per sale, but the fewer people will be able to be inside the circle. And since nobody knows where that next lightning strike is going to come from, it's in our interest to make sure that that circle is as big as possible. In other words, somebody, sorry if I'm boring you there, Momomoto, somebody has to come up with the next big idea. So Unreal is structured in such a way that you don't pay anything, but if you make a game that uses the Unreal Engine, they get a percentage of that. And that's just plain smart. Yes, there are any number of Unreal tutorials out there. I was talking with Natasha about this the other day. Because she's the same way. She just started painting and she's exceptionally good at it. But the honest truth, Henry, is I should have started with Unreal tutorials. There are many of them out there, including ones put out by Unreal Engine, which I recommend highly. And you should start from scratch. And if I'd had any brains at all, that's what I would have done. I would have started from the basic tutorial, like this is what a game engine is, and here's how you save a file. But I didn't. I had enough experience on software like it, like 3D Studio, to just crack it open, start playing with it, and I'd run up against things that I didn't know how to do, and then I'd go look for a tutorial on that. But I would recommend you start from scratch, and it is an astonishing piece of software. It's really quite easy to use, too, once you get the basics down. And the reason I was hesitating is it'd be nice if we were making more engineers, but the fact of the matter is, if you've got a son who's any talent with Unreal, he's got a good chance of getting a job. It's practically the same as being a mechanic in the 50s, you know? So take a look at just look for Unreal beginners tutorials. There are any number of them that are put out by Unreal itself, and hundreds, I'll bet you, of free online tutorials that are put out. Sometimes a guy will put out just one. Some people put out entire sequences. Have them take a look at it and see if it looks interesting. You can download it for free, as I say, but have the discipline to do it in order and not just try and go right to the cool stuff, because you will be building up a tech debt for yourself. You're gonna find yourself in a situation where you know how to do certain things, and then there are some things you don't know how to do, and you should know how to do them, and you would have if you'd done it from the ground up. So I would do that, and I would also look at Flight Sim 2020 videos, and if you can afford it, I would just get I'd get a computer with the fastest video card you possibly could, a little bit of RAM, 8 megs ought to hold you probably, and good luck to you. And I think that will do it for this edition of the Stratosphere Lounge. July 30th, 2020, not the best year I've ever had. But then again, it beats the alternative, right? So thanks very much for joining us. Thanks for your patience with all the sci-fi stuff. We'll go back to political stuff. I'll have a whole new truckload of sci-fi and animations and stuff to do in a couple weeks, I guess, something like that. Anyway, that'll do it for the show. It's made possible by the members at BillWhittle.com, who constantly, every week, or at least every month, pay $9.95 for an annual membership, and it keeps lights on, it keeps the shows coming, and keeps content going out to thousands and thousands of people. So very grateful for all of that, and we're very grateful for this studio and all the other aspects of our lives that we owe directly to our membership. So thank you again for that. I see no reason why I won't be here next week. So unless I decide to put John Parr back on the radio again, I should be here next Thursday. And in any event, whenever we do see you next, we'll see you next time right here on the Stratosphere Lounge.